Hey everyone, it's Terrence Branley with Grow IT Podcast, and today I have Tim Aguilar, who is the founder of CRT. And if you have an interest in managed services, but more importantly, there's a unique twist to Tim's business model. I can't wait to talk about the people side of things. But Tim, I want to welcome you to the Grow IT Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So tell me about your background and tell me about CRT.
Right. Well, CRNT's been around for about 33 years. I myself am the founder. Started it about 33 years ago. We specialize in three separate areas within the IT field: material, hardware, infrastructure. So sales of material, hardware, and software, etc., licensing, etc. Managed services, both premise and cloud-based, along with MSSP security services. And the last one is staff augmentation and project management and projects. The four disciplines of our last area are SQL, web dev, app dev, project administration and management, and security. So those four particular areas are where we drive mostly our staff aug and our project management. Sorry.
Well, that's what I want to get to, in a second. And obviously, the two most important parts of any business are the people and the processes. And what I'd like to ask you is, how does your service, how do you guys help, businesses improve both of those areas?
Well, we really try to tackle challenges, especially related to those three areas, in a common format, which I've dubbed IDR, which is a simple acronym. And it's really simple. It stands for identification, determination, and resolution, meaning you can't resolve something unless you determine it, and you can't determine something unless you identify it. And as we approach client opportunities, we seek to first perform identification, right? It's easy, and it's a common mistake to try to get into a problem where you perceive a client issue might exist and just determine the solution and try to resolve it. And it's 10 times out of 10 horrible compared to just going through and keeping the silo constant with identification. Find out what's going on, ask questions, develop yourself around the client needs, cater to yourself as a sounding board. Listen, and then dialogue through that process separately after you've collected all the assets, after you've collected all the data. And don't be tempted to jump in and offer solutions. Make sure that you've quarantined yourself off in identification. And I think we try to do that. I think we do well at that. I think that's one of the reasons why we have the trust that we do, especially as it revolves around our professional services and our managed services.
And one of the things you mentioned there in terms of the identifying part, and I think a lot of times one of the pitfalls that we as service and solution providers can fall into is to automatically think we know what the problem is, and it's asking those questions and really getting to the root problems and identifying it is not an easy process, right? It's much easier to try and make an assumption and apply a Band-Aid than it is to go through the hard work and truly identify what the main issue is.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I think we all become somewhat tired and exhausted, and we want to just step to the most logical next step. We do ourselves a huge dissatisfaction, and our client a huge dissatisfaction, because oftentimes it's not as simple as a categorical next step. Oftentimes there are components there that need to be valued and measured, understood completely.
What is the best way to get to that? Because again, it's almost an uncomfortable process for both sides, right? Both from a vendor standpoint, from the solutions provider, as well as from the prospector client side. But I mean, you've been doing this for 33 years. I mean, what is the best way to try and attack that?
Well, what we do is we launch into a scope. It depends on the particular challenge. But as in the case where a client has a problem and they're trying to work through a subsequent problem, and it could be something foundational or it could be something exotic, like connecting a database to a CRM platform or a cloud based solution. It's important to first go through a physical inspection of what that really looks like and what the contingencies are, the strengths and the weaknesses of their particular situation, and weigh that against potential outcomes. And I think that really enters into the determination phase after you've collected your assets. That becomes, there are three principal points that you really need to focus on, and that is time, role responsibility, and budget. So, what's the timeline that it's going to take to perform this particular function? What's the budget in line for the effort? And who's going to be doing it? I figure if done correctly and identification is performed in such a way where you're truly getting asset information and you're going through a dialogue through determination, you pretty much put yourself into what seems like a suicidal position, but really isn't. You allow the client to choose, well, I can do that, or you can do that, one of the two, right? You literally surrender your opportunity with faith to the client based on ethical and equitable information. Because if you're doing it right, it's extremely valuable. And when the client sees the value and the client sees the detail, the effort put forth to define and truly look at the outcome as well as all the issues that are involved, most likely they're going to choose you to do it. But that's been my experience.
I agree. A lot of even what you're when you're talking there, it sounds like a partnership, right? And I know that that term gets thrown around, sometimes too often, but that's what it sounds like to me, right? Which is like you're really looking out for each other's best interest and trying to find a way to put 1 + 1 and make it equal 3, not just a supplier vendor type relationship.
Yeah, that's been a painful experience, painful lesson that speaking for myself alone, I had to learn over the 33 odd years. Self interest is a funny thing, especially as a business owner. But when you become so absorbed by what you believe you know versus what your client may not know, you fence yourself in, and your self interest overtakes the greater good. It's a challenge, but by telling the client the honest and total truth, the equitable outcome, by being integrity driven in your role, you provide a level of confidence and satisfaction to the client relationship that they just can't get anywhere else. And you'll be building a long term behavior by taking that opportunity.
I literally feel like I'm watching myself explain that because I kind of feel like I've come to that same realization over the last
Yeah.
few years. I'll just leave it at few. Um, and like you, I wish I had learned that earlier on in my career, but it is what it is. And we kind of go with the value first proposition. And that helps us align our interests to say, we're going to do what's in the best interest of the client, even if that means that they don't end up transacting or paying us a single dollar. That's okay, right? Because we know for sure that when we do get into a client partner relationship that may be transactional in terms of them compensating us, we don't have to worry about our interests aligning. We already have done that with every prospect we've talked to without the expectation of, hey, what's in it for us type of thing. And I just think that's so important. I just think it's interesting to hear you echo that because that's something I've come to a realization the last few years. But
Thank you.
thank you. Why don't you tell us some success stories, right? Because people love hearing success stories, and more importantly, right? And success can be delineated in a number of different ways. So I want to make sure I preface that by saying success story isn't always the, hey, we went public, we 10x'd our sales revenue, but it's saying, hey, here was a client when we came to them, they were in position A and they had this challenge or this issue, and we helped them get to their desired outcome, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
Maybe you
Well,
can give us a couple of those.
we've had some really great success stories over the years. Um, I think if we were to try to pin one down, um, and I'll leave the clients' names out of their industries that we serve quite a bit in the banking and finance, software development, and healthcare areas. One of our clients uh, was, really frustrated and had a difficult time in pulling together his existing team of resources. And this was more of an enterprise client, a little bit larger, not so much enterprise, probably honestly, maybe medium size business. And with certain talents that they had, they still weren't accomplishing their goals. They weren't able to achieve their outcomes that they needed. And their specific outcomes were more based on project work and programming. And they approached us at first just to get a single resource to perform a specific project within the challenge area that they had. And as we involved ourselves and they could see exactly how we approached our problems, how we approached the challenges, how we documented and created identification, determination, and resolution, it led to a much larger opportunity where we found ourselves not with one asset in there performing a single function of 50 hours or 40 hours. We were in there literally within about a year, probably about 16 maybe staff resources in there, with project administrators and managers, with technical resources, with various other talent helping to orchestrate the outcome that the client needed. And the real success in that isn't that, oh, gee, they got the resources they wanted, we made lots of money. The real success in that was that it had an effect on their existing culture. It had an effect on their existing environment. Certain principles and philosophies and the way we do things ended up affecting them and their organization. And all of a sudden, we were able to see a real change and shift in their FTEs, where working alongside our contractors and underneath our project resources, they started to create a rhythm and a behavior of accountability. They started to take more of an effort into following processes and adhering to certain goals that were set by the uppers of their organization that just simply weren't being fulfilled clearly. And I don't think that they were nefarious, and I don't think people were ignorant. I just think that communication is precious. And if it's not set up in such a way where it's easily understood and over communicated, chances are you're not going to have as good an outcome. And I think that's what we provided, an organized, over communicated method. And it took.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
When it takes.
Yeah, what it takes. Yeah. Yeah. True.
What do you see as one of, or it could be multiple? I always ask folks is what do you see as the most significant value that your firm can bring to a prospective client? And how do you communicate that value? You have a couple. One of the things I wanted to kind of get into in terms of the staff augmentation that you mentioned earlier, because I definitely think that is a unique aspect of your business model and unique in the marketplace. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that, the value proposition with regards to that part of the business, and maybe some other aspects that you think bring significant value to your clients.
Well, I think, advocate comes to mind. When you advocate for the organization and you're dealing with a company that truly does care about your self-interest, you end up with something that's somewhat precious. I think of reflecting that question, what is the greatest value that we have? It's providing that tier of trust back and forth. How we accomplish that is through an often overstated word, which I shudder to use because I think it's overused. When I say the word solutions, it's sometimes used as a cop-out. You provide IT solutions. We do. We provide IT solutions, but not in the sense that, it's something that is, so gray and nebulous that we can't define it. Because we provide material infrastructure and hardware, we have an advanced knowledge of technical software licensing, of software in general, of advanced hardware and storage, and everything from data center as into cloud based licensing and product. Uh, we're exceptional there. We have a very strong managed services and managed security desk. So we can extend ourselves in a solution format to take care of clients and maintain the momentum of their environment, their SQL, their databases, keeping things going and maintaining things so that they can focus on whatever they're focusing on. And finally, we do have auxiliary resources that within the 4-tier fields that I mentioned previously can advance themselves to take care of a whole array of different issues, from .NET programming to web dev, app dev to security, and as I mentioned previously, SQL, that can get involved in taking care of the spike issues as well as the long-term ones. And I think that's a real value to most clients. Whereas they're used to maybe reaching out to a single provider to provide one single function, it's often left with finger pointing at the end of a larger event. With us, we're part of that team. And in that kind of a cultural relationship, we stand accountable for our actions and hopefully prove the value.
And in that partnership, I want to, again, I think the staff augmentation side of the business is so important and so unique. And maybe if you can kind of weave that into the partnership that you're talking about and the importance of it, talk a little bit about that side of the business and how it's not only, I see it as a tremendous value proposition for the marketplace, because the people side of the business, especially in the IT consulting world, IT consulting or IT, services solutions, is very
Yeah.
difficult to find. Right. So,
Yeah.
maybe if you can, I'm going to tee it up for you and I'll allow you to do what you're not going to do right now, which is talk about how great it is and the significant depth of people that you have, your resources that you can implement into, client partners.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I would first start off by saying staff augmentation really has taken off, especially in the pandemic, post pandemic, where there's been a shift in the culture environments with many organizations where FTEs aren't as FTE as they probably
Full-time
used to be.
employees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're just not there. And so staff augmentation really steps in and rescues quite often the client and their needs. Frequently, clients will come back with a problem or a challenge and the inability to be able to get the resources when you can get a staff augmented resource to carry out the entire process to its completion. And it's not bound by an annual paycheck, it's bound by performa that's specific in its condition for payment. So you end up getting the best of both worlds. You end up getting the problem resolved and quickly at a forecastable fee that's digestible, rather than hanging on to the hopes and wishes, training, boarding, and long-term associations that might not necessarily yield the results that you want. And I think that's what's been really exciting and successful about our organization. As to the type of staff aug resources we have and we employ, we're a little bit different. Oftentimes, staff aug can be met with what I would call more smart hands than necessarily expertise. Where we've been successful is we've brought in extremely high tier resources to take care of challenged issues, ensuring that the problems get taken care of quickly and efficiently. And when I say high tier, I'm talking about, for example, SQL, not just a SQL engineer, but one of the 14 MCMs in the United States, Microsoft Certified Mastery level. When I talk about OWASP or pen testing or security or SOC 2A and B or HIPAA, I'm not talking about a generic resource to go in and do a foundational test. I'm talking about somebody who has more acronyms behind their name than some institutions, and individuals that can come in and with authority see the challenge, see the problem, and resolve it quickly. They're not cheap. They're not cheap, but they are successful, and they get things done quickly, and they get things done right. They're also not as expensive as most people would think. Um, the trick to the particular relationship and getting the staff log in is finding the right one for the right challenge. It's easy to put somebody in too high, but I generally feel like if you're not going to address the issue for what it really is, oftentimes you'll be overwhelmed by the issue. And it's best to have a clear understanding of what you've got as a problem and the resource you're about to hire to take care of that problem.
Makes sense. Yeah. All right, let me switch gears on a little bit on you. What are some of the coming trends that you see? I mean, I hate to, ask that question a year or 2 years ago, and you'd get a lot of different answers. And today, it seems like every time I ask that question, what coming trends do you see in IT that business should be aware of? It comes to 2 letters that immediately come up. And so I'm not going to say those 2 letters, but if you would like to, feel free to jump in and say
them. Well, AI certainly is taking the world by storm. And yes, that does mean quite a shift in the way corporate America does business today. There's a lot of roles and titles that are simply changing, and a lot of the way we do things that are quickly changing. Information is way more accessible. I think a trend to be aware of is the fact that as you start to look at project and programming based opportunities, the augmentation and addition of artificial intelligence into those particular projects is now more pervasive than I've ever seen it. We have increased our ratio of AI project resources exponentially. I think you'll see more and more of that flooding into the marketplace around platforms such as accounting, around such platforms as inventory and CRM, automation, function, BI, etc. Security obviously has tremendous input in there as well. And we're certainly getting a lot of those resources deployed into clients, as well as helping clients out who already have AI better understand it and make use of it. Outside of that, I would say that you're also seeing a lot of effort to consolidate infrastructure back into secure cloud archetypes, where they're more reinforced for security. The whole premise versus cloud argument has pretty much been resolved for the most part. It's definitely going into cloud, and it's just a question of how you want to set up your architecture and its balance. I can go into more detail about compliance-based challenges that are starting to evolve. But I think most people who are in this space recognize that GDPR, CCPA, and other geographically isolated compliance rules are only getting bigger and stronger. And as they continue to grow, we have to be flexible enough to understand that information needs to be secured, and the methods and practices which we emplace that information into certain geographies has to be done carefully and with an understanding of what can and should be shared and what shouldn't be, an inventory of sorts.
Walk me through, again, a lot of those things that you brought up with respect to AI and probably businesses looking to implement some type of, AI into their processes. Maybe walk me through the path that you take with a new client as of late, whether it's, respect to, AI or some other implementation that you're helping them with. Walk me through the path that you take with a new client in terms of trying to get them from point A to where, they're trying to get to, whatever their desired outcome is.
Sure. Well, in a more generic sense, it's the very first thing. If I'm recreating the environments that I'm involved in, at least, it's through either invitation or curiosity. And it goes something like this. I need help. And that goes to a question of what do you have and who are you? and what have you done? Where are you at? And how reliable are the resources you currently have are. And then based on that particular outcome, we're looking at tool sets, we're looking at platforms, we're looking at individuals. We're trying to better understand how the goal that the client has is not being met and where it makes sense to assist the client. We're asking lots of questions about what the particular challenges are, and we're doing our best to quantify that transparently. I would say the easiest way to explain it would be, if you're familiar with Gantt charts,
Mm-hmm.
we're creating both mental and physical representation of a beginning and an end, along with waypoints and blockers and responsibility targets that help fulfill that particular timeline. Um, the funny thing that happens in our relationships is that somebody may see something as either completely abstract and not really understand, but know that they want to get to a certain point. And the value add that we offer is we go in and we literally create a more clear understanding of how to get there. And like I said earlier, in some ways that's almost seems suicidal. Like, why would you do that? Why would you give them the keys to the kingdom, so to speak? If they've got the talent, what's to prevent them from doing it? Truthfully, I can't think of many that have, but I have had some who've done that, and I'm okay with that. The good part is that you're creating something out of the gray. You're creating something black and white, understandable, something that they can go back to the board and represent. Hey, this is what it's going to take, and this is why we need these resources. And I think that's a real benefit.
I think it's a huge benefit. It's very similar to how we approach things in our business model from the sales and marketing strategy. To kind of help them lay out a specifically defined roadmap. Sometimes it looks like a little bit of a spaghetti, but
Mm-hmm.
really to kind of give them, a roadmap of how they can get from where they are today to where they want to go. And we tell every single prospect that we talk with, we'll do that for you and we'll give it to you. And at the end of the day, it becomes your choice as to whether or not you would like to, implement it yourself or with us. But at the very least, this is kind of a value forward proposition that we're giving to you to say this is our best assessment, having asked a lot of the questions and spent a lot of that time trying to dig into what is the true issues, challenges they're trying to solve, and to give them a roadmap to say, here you go. And so I fully subscribe to that approach, and it resonates with me because it's very similar to our model.
There's one other thing that I would say, just going back to the trend point that I'm starting to see more of, and it's screaming in the back of my head, so I'm going to bring it up. And that is, if you're familiar with agile philosophies, um, and many people are familiar with this, some aren't, might not be, but the representation of technical debt has become something huge. Normally, technical debt is really a discussion that's had between a CTO, a CIO, and the board when you're discussing budgets. But now more than ever, there's a trend as people have become more dependent on cloud-based architectures and as they become more dependent on application-based solutions. They're coming to terms with the fact that the maintenance of those environments, the material hardware that goes into sustaining it, the human resources that go into sustaining it, the sudden cost, the capital cost that you have to outlay for that particular project has a parabolic curve where the value and cost of its usage becomes exponential over time unless you offset it with good resources. And when you look as a CIO or a CTO at what this particular application or the subscription may have cost you, by going through a very clear and focused look at technical debt, you may be surprised. You may be surprised to find out how much it really costs you. And I think more and more we're having to look at components that we don't normally really consider when we think about some of our more modern workplace environments like ingress and egress, the very cost of sending data up and sending data down, not to mention the long-term fees of support engagements, talent set that you may employ within your organization that need to be retrained or newly trained. There are a lot of roadblocks and hurdles when it comes to technical debt. And I think that as we go forward, we're going to see much more conversation around it in the small and medium businesses as well as enterprise.
Well, good. Well, that's a good transition because I know we could have this conversation for a long period of time, but we're going to have to continue that conversation at another time. If a business owner or executive is watching this today and wants to know if you can, help them in their business, what would you say is a good next step for them to get in touch with you?
Reach out to Calculated Research and Technology, CRNT. We're always ready to help and ready to listen. So, would love to engage with any opportunities that specifically revolve around any of the areas I've mentioned so far. And very excited to be looking for team collaboration and positive attitudes.
I think everyone would attest to that. And I'll tell you what, I would love to carry this conversation. I know you're on LinkedIn as well, so I'm gonna post all the links to you. You're such a valuable resource, and I want to make sure people are able to get in touch with you. But I would love to even have you. We're trying to do some more LinkedIn Live events, and I think you'd be fantastic in having on one of those. So I'm going to see if I can round you up for one of those that we're doing here in the near future. So, but Tim, I want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank you for your time. I will look forward to having you on again to carry on the conversation, and we'll look forward to talking with you in the future.
Thank you, Terrence. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.